Please take your seat and hopefully move up a little closer. We'll get started. Thank you. You're a very obedient and kind group. I'm Robert Mounts, the president of the board of the Matheson History Museum. Welcome all of you. I want you to get out your smartphones. There's only one more hour to support the Matheson on the Amazing Give campaign run by the Community Foundation. If you scan the QR code up there, you can pull up a donate button, and it ends at 8 o'clock. So we don't mind if you use your phones for that. Anyway, in partnership with the University of Florida Center for the Humanities and the Public Sphere, the Florida Institute for Built Environment Resilience, and the Gulf Research Program of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, we're excited to welcome historian and author Dr. Jason Vuic to share about his latest book, The Swamp Peddlers: How Lot Sellers, Land Scammers, and Retirees Built Modern Florida and Transformed the American Dream. The Los Angeles Review of Books calls this award-winning book an exceptional account of legal loopholes, egotistical hubris, environmental annihilation, and the mindless development of land at any cost. Dr. Vuic is also the author of The Yucks, 2 years in Tampa with the Losingness Team, that's a word, in NFL history, and The Yugo, The Rise and Fall of the Worst Car in History. Great titles. Originally from Punta Gorda, Florida, Jason is a graduate of Wake Forest University, holds a master's from the University of Richmond, a PhD in history from Indiana University Bloomington, and he's been awarded named a Rotary Ambassador Scholar and a Fulbright Scholar. I happen to be a Rotarian. We are extremely honored to have him at the Matheson with those credentials. And we also have to say, we have so many sponsors. This program is sponsored by the U.S. Senator for the Humanities and the Public Sphere, with support from the Humanities Fund, the Gulf Research Program of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and the Florida Institute for Built Environment Resilience. This program is also sponsored in part by Visit Gainesville, Alachua County, Florida, the City of Gainesville, and the Department of State, Division of Cultural Affairs, and the Florida Council of the Arts and Culture and the state of Florida. That's a mouthful. But now, before Jason comes up, I'm going to introduce my good friend, former Neighborhood Association board member, Dr. Jeff Carney, who wants to say a few words about how they're collaborating.
Thanks, Bob, and thank you so much for providing the space. It's really great, and it's really great to see the UF Gainesville partnership. And I haven't been here all that long, and it's good. It's really great to kind of be in the middle of that. I wanted to be real brief. The sort of genesis of this came out of a studio that we're teaching this semester. It's myself, Andrei Galinsky in landscape architecture, and Changtai Chen in urban planning. I'm in architecture, or teaching what we've called the Super Studio, because it gets 3 departments together around this topic. And that is supported through the Gulf Research Program of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. The goal being studying Gulf communities and the issues of climate change adaptation and how we're going to be dealing with that in the future. After Hurricane Ian, we thought we have to be a part of this in some way and think about this. It's obviously this is a place that needs help. And through a long circuitous couple of drives in that area, Cape Coral became the place that we started to look at. And honestly, I didn't know that much about it when we first started. But I'll tell you, it is one of the most kind of, I think, fascinating, potentially troubling, and certainly influential built environments that we have in the state of Florida. And so the students go, why on earth are we working here? And it's like, this is actually a lot of Florida. And so I think it's really important that we study these places. And so as we start to think about the role that climate change and adaptation to climate change is going to affect, that we have to to deal with, we really have to understand the kind of tremendous histories of these places too. And that one of many of these places has a really tremendous history. So Jason is going to tell us a lot more about that, but thank you all for coming.
Hi, everyone. I wrote down all of those names too to thank all of those organizations. I'm not going to do it. I'm not being rude. I used to run a master's program at Ohio State, and I've organized many events like this, and I'm grateful just thinking about all the events I did for all the different people who brought me here, including Jeff. Well, I live in Texas, believe it or not. I grew up in Florida. My wife's a professor at Texas Christian University, and we're not going to talk about the national championship game or SEC dominance. It's not that dominant, really. I mean, a few scores, the game would have been, 58-14 or something. But anyway, I grew up in Punta Gorda, which is south. How many of you know where Punta Gorda is? Okay, good. It's about 100 miles south of Tampa, right on the Tamiami Trail, off of I-75, on the Peace River, north of Fort Myers, south of Sarasota. It was founded in the 1880s. It was a whistle-stop town. It was the last stop on the railroad in Southwest Florida. You could take a train from New Brunswick or Maine, Bangor, Maine, all the way to Punta Gorda, and then you stopped in 1900. When Florida had 500,000 people, Florida was the same population as Baltimore at the time. It would take you by steamer probably 18 hours then to go from Punta Gorda to Fort Myers, which is 28 miles or something like that. You could, what else? Oh, you could go by ox team. It's 28 hours to get to Fort Myers. And so Punta Gorda grew. And then once the railroad passed it in 1903 or 04, then it just kind of fell asleep again and is the sleepy town that I grew up in. But I loved it because it was old Florida. I grew up in a 100-year-old house that could be anywhere in Gainesville. Big, beautiful wooden house on a brick street, leading out to a park that used to be the grounds of a big turn-of-the-century hotel. Not as nice, but you think of the University of Tampa, the Plant Hotel, the Tampa Bay Hotel. We had a Plant Hotel in Punta Gorda. It was there for 50 years, and then someone burned it down for the insurance money before I was born. But the grounds of the hotel are so big, that's our city park, Gilchrist Park, named for a former mayor, Albert Gilchrist, who became the governor of Florida. So Punta Gorda has old families, old buildings. I went to school with Whiddens and Parkers. These are some of the old settler families of Florida. But all around me were these giant mid-century modern housing developments. That was, to me, Southwest Florida, not the beaches of Sanibel and Fort Myers Beach or Sarasota or the wealth of Naples. The most defining thing to me were these housing developments. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about Cape Coral, 120,000 80 by 125 foot home sites. 120,000 home sites built mostly in the 1960s. Port Charlotte and Northport together used to be one project, for those of you who know that area. Port Charlotte and North Port Charlotte, 200,000 80 by 125 foot home sites. Lehigh Acres, 135,000. They went to quarter acre and a little bit bigger, right? Think about that. 455,000 home sites in 3 communities, built by 1970 and all connected by a paved road. So what did Southwest Florida look like to me? Let's say in 1970, I was born in 72. So 70, these 4 communities had 27,000 people total and 455,000 home sites. I do the math. That's what, 17, 18 home sites for every man, woman, and child. So what did Southwest Florida look like to me, even in the 80s? Right, what do you think? It looked like, to me, it looked like roads to nowhere. Let me see if this. Roads to nowhere. I'm going to come back to that 1 second. That's Lehigh Acres. Look at that. That's Lehigh Acres today. Right near Fort Myers, bustling community. Population-wise, it's not a city, so it's unincorporated county land. But if it were a city, it'd be 175,000 people. That's Fort Lauderdale right there. Most people never heard of it. Well, I found this quote. I love this. I was reading, articles in the 70s. This is a St. Petersburg Times journalist who was doing an article on manatees. So he hired a plane, a little Cessna, and he's flying around the Caloosahatchee and the Peace River trying to count manatees. I don't know how successful you can be doing that, but he's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And he's flying over Fort Myers, and they go out over the hinterland, and he looks down and he sees that. And he honestly freaked out. He put it in his article. What is that? What am I seeing? And he wrote, from Fort Lauderdale, we flew west, where we saw a most depressing vista. Acre after acre had been cleared and subdivided into cramped suburban streets before there were even people to live there. In all this acreage, there weren't a dozen houses, only a gray, treeless landscape waiting for people to move in to justify the developer's optimism. So that is my book. That's what I'm writing about. How these communities were built, who built them. I'm an historian, I'm a storyteller. Even these guys today, they do things. They build things, they're architects, they're going to do cool things. But even I know there must have been an economic model here. You don't do this if you're going to lose money, right? Someone was making money. This was working in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. This is Lehigh. This is what he saw. There you go. There's some more Lehigh. Look at that design. Look at that. Endless roads to nowhere. That's Northport, Florida in 2019. Right off of I-75, that road cutting through there. Completely empty lots, roads to nowhere. And I was joking today with the students that if you're from up north, remember in high school when you go to high school parties in the woods to hide from your parents, you'd go to the dam or the water tower, right? We went to a road to nowhere. And we all knew where it was, but the cops had no clue. It's called Loveland Boulevard. Everyone in my school knew. We would draw maps. Oh, I found a new one. No, they'll never find us. And we'd have a map, like a treasure map to go to a party, and it'd be in your locker. I knew a girl, and her mom ran the mimeograph machine. She'd mimeograph directions to parties. This is still there. And my book ideas have always been things that make me go, what? Huh? I have like a floppy disk in the back of my head with book ideas. And sitting there at 17 years old on one of these streets made me go, I live in a really weird place. This is Mad Max level. This is post-apocalyptic in its feel. And I knew a lot of land developers. My dad wasn't in development. My good friends, I knew salesmen. I knew VPs of companies that did this. I knew this history. And then it hit me one day. That's the Florida book you need to write. That's the one. And so that is the origin of the Swamp Peddlers. And what I found was it wasn't just swamp peddling in Southwest Florida. It was swamp peddling all over the state. And so I focused on the freestanding communities, not suburbs, not communities. We had one in Punta Gorda called Punta Gorda Isles, like 20,000 home sites, but it was connected to the city grid. So that was different. I'm talking about cities that were built out of nothing, out of whole cloth in the 1950s. And some of the big ones, Port St. Lucie, same company that built Port Charlotte. Notice there's no ports in St. Lucie. There's no port in Port Charlotte, and there's sure as heck not a port in Northport. We used to have a yacht club, and we'd snicker driving by going, where are you going to go? That ditch doesn't go out to the sea, everybody. Deltona, for those of you from Orlando. Spring Hill, which isn't that far from here, right? Built out of whole cloth. Palm Bay, which used to be Port Malabar, no port. Palm Coast, Marion Oaks. You can take your class to Marion Oaks. That's right near here, right? In Marion County. I drove through there first time ever, and it's Port Charlotte in the woods. I mean, it is. For those of you, I'm sorry if anyone lives. I'm going to apologize to anyone who lived or grew up in any of these communities. I had the mayor of Northport storm out of one of my talks, but sorry. All right. This is another quote that I found, and before I get started. This was a writer, a sports writer for the New York Times. And in the 1980s, the Mets, for those of you my age, I'm 50, the Mets were really good. They were like the sexiest team in baseball. They were always getting in trouble. They had the best players. They were marrying movie stars, and they moved from St. Pete to Port St. Lucie. And St. Pete in the 80s, today it is hip. It is cool. In the 80s, St. Petersburg was old. They were proud to have the largest shuffleboard club in the world. Okay. The joke, I put it in my book, I read this. One of the jokes was the only movers and shakers in St. Petersburg were the paramedics. and that was a joke in the paper. And so they had to move from at least that urban area to Port St. Lucie, which had no downtown, strip malls on a few roads at the time. And thousands and thousands of 80 by 125 foot home sites and stucco homes, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. And they hated it. And the writers had to come down for 6 weeks from New York City to Port St. Lucie. And they would write, I mean, nasty stuff. It would be in the sports articles. I'm here again for another week in this awful place. And they would put it in the article. And this is what one of the writers wrote. He's like, I'm trying to figure this place out. It's the quintessence of suburban sprawl with no city to sprawl from. That was in a sports article on a baseball game. Amazing, right? But that's what I'm writing about. And I'll explain why there were no downtowns and no sidewalks and no industry. Now, where does this all begin? Charlotte County, my sleepy little county. I'm sad to say the most important thing to ever happen there was the building of Port Charlotte. I wish it wasn't. I wish we had some great inventor or some poet or some writer. Maybe I'm from there. Maybe people will know it. Anyway, it started, right here. This area north of Charlotte Harbor, Port Charlotte, Murdoch, Northport, that area right there, that was a 78,000 acre ranch called the Frizzell Ranch. A.C. Frizzell, this is South Florida in those days, prior to the 1950s. A.C. Frizzell was an Alabama farmhand who came to Florida and became a railroad telegrapher. You know, the guy, beep, 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 that's what he did. And his railroad went from Arcadia to Boca Grande. That's all it did. Now, why? What did it have on it? What did Boca Grande do? Does anybody know this? Phosphate. That was the deep water port that Punta Gorda would do these little dinky barges, and finally they dredged Boca Grande. And he had a railroad that would load up in DeSoto County and Polk up there, and then come through Arcadia. And then that was his, so he knew this land. It wasn't very valuable. That South Florida land, Southwest Florida gets more rain in the summer than Seattle gets in a year. So in the winter, it's bone dry and you'll have massive forest fires. You can even drive through them and almost die. I have, there's big forest fires there. But then in the summer, the sand, it's sand with a shell-filled substrate underneath. So the water pools. So you can't grow anything. It's not good for growing vegetables. It was poor cattle land, really poor cattle land until there were new grasses brought in. This wasn't very valuable land. Timber companies would cut down all the old growth trees and leave it, and then it would go on the public rolls for $1/4 an acre. So this A.C. Frizzell had a job even through the Depression, and he slowly but surely acquired land at $1/4 an acre. Sometimes pioneers would just leave and he would give them a few dollars on the way out. And by the 50s, he acquired 78,000 acres. Okay, and something's going to change. There's the land. There's Florida to me. When I'd go to college, they'd go, "Hey, Florida boy, did you have a good time over spring break?" And like, "Where'd you think I went? Hawaii?" Right? This is my Florida. This is cattle country. This is pine country, which in Southwest Florida was largely denuded by timber companies. People don't really pay attention to that enough. I know that DeSoto County, which used to be 5 counties down there, in 1920 had 1 million stumps. 1 million stumps. That was like a selling point. If you can pull these out, you can boil them down for the tar and sell it for turpentine. That was a selling point. 1 million stumps. So a lot of that prairie used to be forest. Well, this was what he had. This is what no one could really use until the 50s. Now something's going to change. Land that he bought for $1/4 during the Depression is now worth about $40 an acre. That's a big difference. Of course, you're going to sell out 3 million in 1954. It's a fortune, right? Something changes. What changes in Florida? Anybody have any idea? Air conditioning, absolutely. DDT for mosquitoes. You have the GI Bill for all these GIs. There were millions of GIs came through Florida, and they didn't want to go back to Poughkeepsie, or like my dad in the Korean War, didn't want to go back to Pittsburgh. They wanted to come to Florida. Now there's highways, highway system. Though I didn't get I-75 until the 80s. Thank you guys for North Florida people. Punta Gorda didn't have I-75 until I was in junior high. But things changed. Then you have VA loans, FHA loans, and the first generation of people with Social Security. Defined pensions are finally really coming online in mass in America. And so you're going to see not just the Frizzell Ranch sell for $3 million, 25,000 acres in Charlotte. That's Rotunda, the development of Rotunda. That was to 2 Vanderbilt brothers. They also developed Cape Hayes. kind of a nice place, but not a very successful development. 18,000 acres in Lehigh, that's Lehigh Acres. Lucky Lee Ranch sold out to a rat poison mail order salesman named Lee Ratner. Rat poison salesman buys Lee Ranch, Lee Ratner. 8,500 acres in St. Lucie to Gardner Cowles. He was the great media mogul at the time. That's Port St. Lucie. Look at this one. 294,000 acres and one sale in Collier County. That's the Collier family. Any historians here, someone needs to write a book on the Collier family, one of the most important Floridians ever. No books, nothing, all closed, private company, billionaires. Collier at one time owned 1.2 million acres of Florida land. And this was sold simply to settle. Two brothers died and they had to settle the estate. So they sold it, including parts of Marco Island and Estero Bay. They owned everything. It's remarkable. And they still own huge stretches of Naples. 78,000 acres in Charlotte. That's Port Charlotte, Northport. 12,000 acres in Hillsborough, Sun City Center. This all happens. And these are just a few. If I really got into the records, you would probably see 100 sales of ranches. Ranches that were a good way to make money that suddenly became not worth working anymore. Too much money in sales. Too many people coming to Florida. But who could live here? You're a GI, you're 30, it's baby boom, you got the wife, you got 2 kids, you don't want to live in your parents' tenement in Cincinnati, right? Where are you going to go? You're going to go to the suburbs. But if you're old, if you're a retiree, can you go to Levittown? Can you afford it? So think about this. Let's think about the 50s. I'll come back one second. It's the age of the suburb. And so put Florida into context. The most famous suburb is Levittown. People say it's the first suburb. That's wrong. It was the first that professors at NYU could get in their cars and drive out and study. So it became the first suburb. It's not. There were many suburbs, old ring suburbs. I lived in one in Columbus, Ohio. But Levittown was the one we all know, right? And cities, from 50 to 60, cities grew 0.1%. 0.1% in spite of the baby boom. Suburbs grew 45%. So people were getting to the suburbs, but the first suburbs like Levittown, you needed to make about $5,000 a year to live in Levittown to qualify for a mortgage. The average retired couple, middle income retiree, made about $3,500 a year. So if you look, you watch Leave It to Beaver, there's no grandmother in Leave It to Beaver. They didn't go to the suburbs. And I looked through all the literature on Levittown. There's famous sociological studies. One study called The Levittowners actually studies every man, woman, and child who lived there. There are very few old people, but you want to go to the suburbs too. You want a new house. You want a new life, right? You're not just going to work and die as you did in earlier parts of the 1800s, right? Earlier ages, this new generation of retirees. So you're going to go to Florida. You're going to go to offbeat sections of the state, is what the New York Times called Charlotte County, Lee County, offbeat sections of the state. And the people who figure out how to do this are the Mackle brothers. Anybody heard of the Mackle brothers? Okay, not that many people. The Mackles, I believe, are easily top 5. I count them as one entity, one person. The Mackle brothers are easily top 5 most important Floridians of all time. You think of Ed Ball, you think of Plant, you think of Flagler. The Mackles. They're forgotten and they're monstrously important. They were 3 brothers from Miami. They grew up all over the South. Their father was an English Catholic immigrant, came over with nothing, and became a foreman on work crews, and then started running his own construction firm. He worked all over the South, and he would build like barracks for soldiers, tenements for the new South that was rising up at the turn of the century in Atlanta, in Richmond. And he had moments where he was very wealthy and moments where they had nothing. A true builder. Floridians know that. But these 3 brothers became Southern blue bloods, though they were told by their parents, don't tell anyone we're Catholic. Don't tell the Shriners we're Catholic. One brother went to Vanderbilt, 2 went to Washington and Lee. And during World War II, one of them was a CB in the construction brigade, which is what Levitt was. These are the guys who would roll up to Iwo Jima. Literally, there's still fires burning, and they start unloading whole huts. Pieces that were prefab, as much as you could prefab, to bring in housing quickly. Well, Levitt learned this. Assembly line building techniques, things he learned from the Seabees, the Mackles knew how to do. One brother stayed home and built an air facility at Opelika, a naval base in Key West. And then they started to build suburbs in the late 40s, Pompano Beach area, little houses. And they began experimenting with selling them to people. How do we get these GIs with no money, but they got the GI Bill? They got a monthly check. How do we get them into these houses? And they tinkered with ways to, $25 down. And you see these weird ads, $27.52 down, like, and $40 a month and whatever. And they were hinting at it. Then they bought Key Biscayne. They bought a coconut plantation. And people said, no one is going to commute to Miami from Key Biscayne. And of course, that's not true. And I wish my parents had gone to Key Biscayne in 1957. I wouldn't be here speaking. They took a coconut plantation and built a freestanding suburb. And it was solidly middle class, not cheap GI houses, middle class white collar homes for this Miami's new emerging services industry, bankers, people like that. And they figured out how to build whole communities, not just suburbs. We can do this again. And they began looking around the state. And they were approached by some people who own land, who bought the land, the Frizzell Ranch. And they're thinking, okay, we can build a city here. Well, who's going to live in it? GIs can't. I mean, Punta Gorda, when I was growing up, it was small. In those days, no hospital, close hospital 30 miles, closest movie theater was 30 miles. I mean, you couldn't live here. There were no jobs. But then they realized if we sell this to retirees, if we figure out a way to get, and they realized the retirees we want, they're not the rich retirees going to Mar-a-Lago. They're not the ones going to Jupiter Island. We don't want those people. We want the masses. Our father built for the masses. They always wanted to build for them. They never built really nice things. They didn't do that. They built for the masses. They said, they had sayings, the family, like all business families, but don't build monuments to yourself, sons. Build things that people can use. And they realized the money was in economies of scale. So let's start pitching to retirees and let's figure out how to do this. Well, they get a check every month. How about we hook people? They're not going to buy homes straight up. How about we hook them on lots? $10 down and $10 a month. And so they began pitching using Madison Avenue ad campaigns. These men were millionaires. They lived a middle-class life. They had a maid in the family. The wife stayed home, but they had a couple cars. They weren't, opulent in their lives. They were simple people, middle-class in their values. And so they began pitching using $1 million ad campaigns, Madison Avenue ad campaigns, like you see in the movie Mad Men. The slickest ads you've ever seen. And the state archives in Tallahassee, they're beautiful. I wish I could frame them, just incredible art. And putting them in Life magazine, Time, radio ads, TV, first infomercials you would ever see. Remember when, for those of you who are older, remember at 11:30, news would go off and then it would go, that'd be the end? Well, they'd run a Mackle ad. What is that? I'm sure people would gather around the TV. TV's still on at 12 at night. And they began selling Florida before Disney World, selling Florida before, what do we have down here? Sunken Gardens was our biggest attraction. Weeki Wachee, no Bucks, no Dolphins, no hockey, no nothing. They sold Florida in the Florida dream and ad after ad. I found one, they did a 5-week ad campaign that was 1.5 million in the 50s. Big bucks. I found a 13 or 14 page insert in the same day in the Chicago Tribune and the New York Times. Come to Port Charlotte, 13-page insert in the New York Times. Port Charlotte, like, what? That's what they did. This is their typical ad, $10 down and $10 a month. And they thought people had done this before. There's some in the early 50s, $750 down, $750 a month. But the Mackles put the money behind it. And it hit a chord. It struck a chord that people you would get that little coupon right there. Now, how would this work? You see that. For those of you from the magazine age, I remember doing this as a kid, cutting out an ad from a comic book and getting Army Men or something for $2. You would put a check with it or money, and you would fill your name out. And it was usually, and I'm not being sexist, it was the wife who handled the books in the family. And she would fill this out and write a check and send it in. And what would come back in the mail? What are you buying? You're buying a lot in Port Charlotte. You vaguely know where that is. You would get a map marked with an X. Imagine a map marked with an X. If I did that, my wife would murder me. Honey, look what I bought. This is amazing. Magic beans, right? I mean, honestly. And this is Lehigh Acres. Word to the wise, anytime you see a land developed from the 50s called Heights, don't trust them. Word to the wise. That tells me right away that you're the lows. Okay, so they look at this one. Your coupon, your friends. And you remember that like the 50s, like the honeymooners, couples knew each other. People lived on their porches. So couples moved down together. Families moved together. They missed each other. We want to go to Deltona because Bob and Ann have left. And I don't know, they would do this. Whole streets, whole neighborhoods would move down. And so what happens is this coupon campaign in the beginning, the Mackles were like, well, it might work. I don't know. And they ran it, and literally within a week, bushels full of envelopes are coming in. They built another building and hired 50 or 60 young secretaries to handle they had folders. This whole wall would be folders, and they'd stick a contract. Each folder was a lot. Section X, number 27, row 3, put the contract in. Until finally they got with IBM to handle the mass of the people doing this. So this is going to morph within 2 or 3 years, by say 60, into very sophisticated techniques to get you to come to Florida. Sponsored trips. Look at this one. Florida Ho. You want to come by plane, train, or bus? Fort Myers, Florida was rinky-dink in those days, and the company that did Cape Coral had to expand the airport to let jet planes fly in. And by the mid-60s, Cape Coral was flying twice a day to LaGuardia. I mean, Southwest Florida to LaGuardia? It's so normal today to fly anywhere you want in Florida, really. In those days, it's shocking. I could imagine the first Fort Myers people looking at a jet landing, right? So they would get you on trains, these sponsored trips. So it was like $50 trip to Florida, and they get you down here, and they work you over. I'm a chicken. My wife won't let me go and even negotiate for cars because I'd be like, okay, whatever, sure, just don't hurt me. I could imagine how many lots I would come home, honey, I got 40 lots, right? Look at this one. That is a train station, I believe in Boston or Philadelphia. Imagine, it's cold. You get off the train and you see a woman in a bathing suit telling you about Port Charlotte. I'd be like, okay, wherever, sign. Just here's my $10 down, please. But look at that, crowds, and they're hitting volleyballs. And these women, I promise you, have never been to Port Charlotte. And if they wore those in Port Charlotte, they'd get chased by a hog or struck by a rattlesnake, right? There was Port Charlotte Beach to this day, we still joke about. It's on a river, it's not a beach, right? And I'll tell you all the techniques. They even sold lots internationally, 50, 60, 70 cities around the world, and specifically to GIs. Why GIs? Steady income. They look for someone who's about 35. His career's ending. He sees the end. He knows what his pension will be. Son, thought about your future, that kind of stuff. They would hire World War II generals, heroes, to come to Munich and live and do seminar like me now going, Port Charlotte is the wave of the future. And you're like, yes, sir, I'll buy land. I have a picture, it's not a good one, but I have a picture of a Volkswagen bus, and on the side says Port St. Lucie, Port Charlotte, and it would pick up GIs in Munich, get them drunk, and then sell them lots, right? They sold in the Philippines, they sold in Korea, they sold all over the world, and they sold in Thailand when soldiers were in Vietnam. They would hire girls, pretty girls, dancers, who were Thai, they called them bird dogs, to get you to come to a bar, and they come on, GI, and you come in and they show you a film on Cape Coral, Florida. And people would buy. And they even sold, wrap your brains around this one. You're in Rome, an American, on your honeymoon, and you're in the Intercontinental Hotel, and a woman comes up to you and goes, would you like to see a film on beautiful Cape Coral, Florida? And Americans would buy land in Florida in Europe. Not Germans, not expat, tourists buying land. Again, my wife would have divorced me on my honeymoon if I bought land sight unseen. Honey, you know what I bought downstairs? I didn't get that bottle of wine. I got a land in Punta Gorda, you know? So, yes. Good question. Good question. And I'll tell you about the salesmanship in a second. But what they do is they, for example, most of they didn't want to sell to African Americans. I didn't know, I didn't run across anti-Jewish sentiment. I ran across when, for example, when they did these, they would call you and use the phone book and call neighborhoods. They just wouldn't call the neighborhood where African Americans lived ever. They wouldn't do the advertisements. They wouldn't. And if a black person later on, even into the 60s, would come, they would take them on the worst tour. They'd make them wait 45 minutes and then take them out to the back end and then say, this is not going to go. And they even had names. The Cape Coral, they called black people Mr. X. Mr. X is here. And you just knew you were trying to get rid of them. That, you know, they did that kind of stuff. And I address it a little bit. And so by 1970, Cape Coral, I had 2 or 3 black people, 10,000 people. Port Charlotte had none, 10,000 residents, no black people. Lehigh Acres had 1 or 2. You know, so that's a good question, though. That's exactly what they did. The salesman weeded them out without any, you know, no statement saying don't sell to them. They did it informally, but they did it. They did it very successfully. By the mid 1960s, everyone gets involved in this racket. And the Mackles were always using economies of scale. I go out of the way in the book, say they were straight shooters. No one got ripped off in Port Charlotte. They got an okay lot away from the water. Salesman might have said it was waterfront when it had a canal in the back that didn't go out to the ocean. But you got what you paid for. You $800, you know, no one broke the bank on that one. And if you were mad, they would generally give you your money back or give you a new lot. But there were others. Anyone who sold more than 50 lots had to report those lots to the state, show the plats, and there was some oversight, some. If you sold less than 50 at a time, you were called a 49er. And the 49ers are the ones that should be in movies and books. And, you know, those are the ones selling Everglades property. Those are the ones lying to you outright. Yeah, per developer, not salesman, right? Some of these organizations were massive. General Development, one of the companies that Mackles founded, at 350,000 acres at one time. I mean, million lots. But it explodes. And I really can't tell you, for those of you in development, those of you in construction, the alpha and omega of Florida land development from 55 to 75 was this. These companies were massive. The Gulf American Corporation was bought up eventually. That was the Rosens of Cape Coral, was bought up. And by the late 60s, it was the largest corporation in Florida. It was bigger than Florida Power and Light, bigger than Publix, bigger than whatever. I mean, you name a company, I don't even know any other companies to name, but it was the biggest, 4,500 employees. Big. These were Wall Street listed firms. The General Development Corporation and the Gulf American Corporation almost very nearly hit Fortune 500 level quickly. So these are companies that came out of nowhere. In 54, no installment land sales. In 64, they're the biggest companies around. This is what you did. Of a certain age in Florida, in South Florida, you wanted to develop land. This is what you did. If you were Don Draper down here, you were developing land. This is where the money was. This is where the communities came from. These are the Rosens. Cape Coral. For those of you who studied Cape Coral, I love these guys. Jewish brothers from Baltimore. They grew up as tough as nails carnival barkers as kids. Step right up, selling things on the boardwalk. Together, they fought with each other like dogs. I'm sure though that, you know, they could fight each other, but if you fought one of them, the other brother would kill you. You know, they were tough, and made their own bucks by hook or crook. And they sold shampoo. They sold bric-a-brac. They sold TVs in installments. Remember layaway? I think you can still do layaway at Walmart, but you know, you put a little bit of money each way, they put the product away and you come and get it. That's how they sold. And so they knew how to sell, and they had networks of salesmen going door to door. You ever seen Glengarry Glen Ross? You ever seen that? You see it. It's about salesmen. Alec Baldwin, Al Pacino. It's amazing. Alec Baldwin has a scene in that. I can't show you. It's too vulgar, but he's the boss salesman and he browbeats them. And that's Leonard Rosen. Leonard Rosen would tell the salesman, if you worry about taking people and you feel bad, then get out. You're fired. That people are full. I mean, I have a paraphrasing, but essentially people are cheap. They're here to be taken. And if you won't take them, I'll find someone who will. Get out. Right? Who's the salesman of the week? You get a watch. You get a bottle of bourbon, and a bonus. Like this stuff, like think of the most stereotypical used car salesman. I never had a bad experience with used cars, but this is what these guys did. They worked you over and they were brilliant at it. They sold shampoo, $1 a bottle, ads on TV, formula number 9. They had ads. One ad, it was in my book. It's a woman with a gun and a knife and a noose around her neck, and she's pretty, like June Cleaver, and it says, "If my hair looks bad one more day, I'll kill myself." Right? This is their ads. Another one. You ever seen a bald sheep? No, you won't, because we use lanolin. And sheep, it comes from sheep. Like it was shampoo they bought in bulk from hotels and mixed in a bathtub and put in little bottles. And they made a couple $1,000,000. I mean, tough guys. And so you see the Mackles, Vanderbilt, Washington and Lee. These guys are from the School of Hard Knocks. And Leonard Rosen on the right is like, well, why are we selling shampoo for $1 a bottle? Florida's where the action is. And so he comes down and he buys leases. He even has options to land. He didn't even buy land. Buys this low-lying bit of Southwest Florida at Cape Coral, this low-lying area that was too waterlogged to really even be a ranch. And they turn it into Cape Coral, and they become mortal enemies of the Mackles. They hate each other. They support different governors. They have dueling call centers. They just fight like dogs. They sue each other. This is Cape Coral, the original ad. This is my book cover. This was an incredible artist from Field and Stream, and the Rosens hired him to do this. It's gorgeous. Big bucks in their ads. They spared no expense because the ads worked. I love this Mackle picture. I couldn't find who actually did it, but look at the giant board of Port Charlotte, and they had little pins of the sold lots and the unsold lots. Looks like, DEFCON 5 at NATO or something, Look at that. I love that. So in 1962, the Mackles, who formed the General Development Corporation, GDC, they leave to form the Deltona Corporation. They didn't like their bosses. They wanted to do different things. Not their bosses, their partners. So they sold out, formed Deltona, and they begin building. General Development at first built Port Charlotte, Port St. Lucie, Palm Bay, Marion Oaks, I believe. No, that was Deltona. Deltona then builds Deltona, Spring Hill, Marion Oaks, and Marco Island, among others. And that's another big company. So it's the Rosens with the Gulf American Corporation, the Mackles with the Deltona Corporation, and the General Development Corporation were the biggest of the big. And they were mortal enemies. They traded salesmen. You get fired at one, you work at another. You're the best one at one. You get more money to go to the other. And they sell and sell and sell. And these companies will divide by, I'd say 65, several million Florida lots. Several million Florida lots. The great majority of them left fallow. Roads to nowhere. All over the state. And many smaller ones you don't know. They call them ghost subdivisions today. Port Charlotte, Marion Oaks, Deltona, they have areas that aren't developed, but will be someday. There are places in Volusia County underwater with a road sign from 1954 from a 49er. We have one in my county called Harbor Heights, and there's a lot of them. I'm sure there's some around here. So this is Port Charlotte. Now, just to tell you quickly, what would you do? You needed to raise up the waterfront land 5.5 feet above sea level. So you would dredge and fill to make waterfront lots and then use that land for septic tanks, right? It had to be high enough, but that meant you cut down all the vegetation. So Cape Coral denuded, the Rosens denuded probably 40,000 acres of it, the area closest where the canals are in the water, to create waterfront property, which was more valuable, but also to be able to put in septic tanks. No city water wells. So septic tank in the front, that lump in your yard, that Florida living. You ever seen that in some of these homes? You have a lump in your front yard and you're, what is that lump? And it's a septic tank. And if it's leaking, your yard is neon green. If you've ever seen those homes. And in the back of the house would be your water well. Well, what happens when it floods? right? You start to see a few instances in Florida I found of like some tropical diseases where people are consuming water they shouldn't consume. Lehigh Acres has 22,000 septic tanks today, and they're never going to be connected or inspected, right? From this era. That's Port Charlotte, a treeless landscape, treeless. You cut down all the timber. It was largely denuded anyways, but you cut down it all of it. All of it. This is Cape Coral. This is one of my favorite shots. Look at that. Look at the landscape of Cape Coral. They couldn't keep the trees because if you raise the land 5.5 feet, you'd have to either use big buckets around them, or if you covered their roots, it'd die. So you just pull them out. They cut down live oaks and things that are hard to grow along the water down there that were hundreds of years old. Trees, there's a couple books where people talked about a tree they cut down and they couldn't believe it, and they would stack all of that vegetation into giant piles and let it burn. And then you could see it from Fort Myers. Right? It's amazing, amazing. This is my favorite, one of my favorite pictures ever. This is a picture of Cape Coral's fly and buy program. You would come to Cape Coral and you park your car and they would take you up in a Cessna and it would land on Del Prado Boulevard. For those of you who worked in Cape Coral, Del Prado, it was a big boulevard, land a plane and you'd get in and you're flying along and the pilot would go, "Your lot is right." And he'd drop a bag of flour right there. And you go, "Ooh, that's a wonderful lot." And he didn't know where your lot was. He was just throwing sugar out the plane, or you know what I mean? And the pilots would go, "I don't work for these guys. I'm just the pilot." Lie. He's going to get a portion of that sale too. I gave a talk in Cape Coral. Nicest people. I thought they were going to murder me. Not at all. But I gave a talk in a funeral home. It was a talk in a funeral home. It was really funny, but the nicest people in the world. And a woman came up after and she's like, "My dad was Joe Razzo," or something like that, Italian name. And I said, "I remember that name from these interviews." That I didn't do them, older interviews. And he was a bartender. And Leonard Rosen liked the guy and knew that he could talk and said, "Come and sail for me." And he was so good, he became vice president for international sales. He went from bartending to international sales, and they lived in Italy, and he did $1 million in the first month he was there. Right? And his daughter comes up, and I'm ready for her to just punch me or something. And she goes, "Oh, it was great." Something like, "He used to take everybody. He made a lot of money." And she goes, "I was a babysitter too. And I would watch the kids when they went up in the plane. And if they made a sale, I'd get some money." The babysitter got a, right? I mean, it's amazing talking to these salesmen. So that is Cape Coral, the fly and buy program. Fly and buy. Amazing. Okay, so I was reading a book on the property meltdown of 2008, 2009, before I even thought of doing this. A guy named Paul Reyes, a great writer, I think for the Atlantic or something like that. Great young writer. And his parents were on their honeymoon in Miami Beach, and the phone rings in their hotel room. And someone goes, "Hi, I'm with Lehigh Acres. We'd like to offer you a free tour." Could you imagine? On your honeymoon in your room, unbidden, a phone rings, and it's someone selling you through the front desk to get on a bus to go to Lehigh Acres, which is going through Seminole Indian Reservation. It's going through Clewiston. It's going through, tough sugar areas to get there. And then they were sold lots. They bought a lot, and then her parents bought a lot. And he wrote about Lehigh Acres. And so he wrote, "The idea from the beginning was to sell lots, nothing more. No forethought was given to the possibility that someone might actually want to live there. No consideration given to streets or schools or sewers. Selling, not building, was how these developers measured their success." Selling lots. They never thought about a community. They never thought about a city, and they never truly thought, what's this going to look like in 20 years? What's this going to look like in 40 years? What's this going to look like if all of our lies come true? They didn't, right? They didn't. So I wanted to, I read this and I underlined it. I remember this. I actually copied it, put it on my pegboard of book ideas. And I'm like, and I'm like, what did the guys who did this say? What did the Mackles say? What did the Rosens say? What did those guys say? Oops. This is Gerald Gould. He was Lee Ratner's main man on the ground. I love this guy. "We gave so much thought to selling the land that the normal reservations for commercial properties, schools, all the ancillary things you need in a community weren't made. We even had canals that ran uphill." How'd that happen? right? Oh, these guys would talk about it. You won't believe what we used to do, right? This is Gerald Gould. Gerald Gould, I believe, ran a lot of the Citrus County development property before he died in the 80s. This is a good one. Port Charlotte started out as a land sales project. Then once community development initiated to generate new sales, snowballed the site into a city. It's too bad we can't go back. He said that in the 70s while they were still selling lots. Like, yeah, we screwed up. You want to buy a lot? This is a great one. Leonard Rosen. I think we're going to build a city in spite of ourselves. And that one is a great scene. There's a woman who wrote a book, his secretary. If you can find a copy of it, buy it. It's like $100 on eBay. Self-published book by his secretary. What did I say? Oh, man. All right. I'll give you 30. No. I have a copy of it. I actually interlibrary loaned and copied each page. And it's strangely written, but she was a smart woman. And she came down, she had a background in advertising up north and came down to Florida and there were no jobs. And so she just became his secretary. And then he realized, that guy only thought in who's talented and who can make money. And she was very good at organizing his affairs and then wrote about it. And she would laugh he hired Connie Mack Jr. Connie Mack Sr. was the great baseball legend. Connie Mack Jr. was just Connie Mack Jr. He didn't do anything else and people love that connection. He was a good man, a hardworking man. And because of his notoriety and fame, is a senator down here? Yeah, the third is a senator, Connie Mack. You're right. Okay. Yeah, right. But that was the name in Southwest Florida, right? Lies that came true. In the scene in the book, or one of the books is Leonard Rosen, they're having a hard day, and his engineer helped build like tropical bases in Iceland or bases in Guatemala and things that were hard to build. The Azores. He got him to do Cape Coral because it was so hard to build. And they had a long day and they're in their suits and he leans over his car and they're having a drink and Leonard Rosen goes, man, I think we're going to build a city in spite of ourselves, right? This is that. But no one at the time, to get it to what you're doing now, no one at the time thought, what happens if we turn Redfish Point into this? What happens if we dredge and fill 400 miles of canals? Right? And I didn't start this book as an environmentalist, conservationist. I mean, I support all those things, but I wanted to write a book having lived in a town where a company went under in shame, the General Development Corporation, and 400 people were out of work. And it was in the late 80s, GDC went under and they sent the 4 executives to prison. I believe they got out. They got out when they ordered a new trial, but they were sent to prison. I remember it was on 60 Minutes. And so I thought, I knew people who used to sell, and I thought it'd be funny to write a true history of Yankees being sweet talked into buying lots. And then once I got into the book, about halfway through, I mentioned this today, I realized these sales had real implications. This sales model has left us with big problems as Floridians. I honest to God, I was halfway into the book and I thought there's more to this. And I began talking to urban planners all over Southwest Florida who remembered the days when it was Wild West. A good friend of mine, his father was a VP of one of these companies, and I interviewed him. I interviewed salesmen. I interviewed buyers. I interviewed engineers. I had one guy come up to me and he's like, "Oh, you remember that marina? I dredged that in a weekend. Nobody knew it. No permits." He was proud. Wow, I get a lot of that. How stuff worked, how they did the roads, what they screwed up with, and what they hid. And so no one thought, what happens? What happens to water quality? What happens when in Cape Coral in the beginning, what happens when these water wells have metal casings and salt water comes up 200 miles of canals and eats through the casings and starts to drip down into the fresh water in the aquifer 20,000 times, drip, 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 drip. What happens to our aquifer? It's largely fixed. They get water from elsewhere, and then they've capped all these wells and they put people on city water. But for a long time, they had an entire office devoted to capping water wells to stop saltwater intrusion. They had a saltwater intrusion office. One, sorry? Yes, yes, yes. Always onto the buyer, right? But no one thought in the beginning, no one in the state. And ready for you guys in development prior to the 1970s, this blew my mind. Someone asked me today what really blew my mind, and I got this wrong. This is what blew my mind. That prior to the 1970s, only cities and towns, only municipalities in Florida had the blanket right to plan and zone. So if you lived in Charlotte County, not Punta Gorda, you could build whatever you wanted and chase that government official off your land with your shotgun. You could build 5 Taj Mahals on top of a Space Needle, right? And paint it pink. You could do whatever you wanted at all. Now, big counties, Hillsborough, Dade, counties with means, Sarasota, they could get the right, they won the right to plan and zone through the state legislature. But the state legislature literally had to pass an act to say, Sarasota County has the right to plan and zone now. So where are all these developments? Lee, Charlotte, St. Lucie, Hernando, right? They're in places where the counties not only they didn't mind you doing it, not only let you do it, but we're happy. Charlotte County's like, great, build a missile silo here. We don't care. Great. More jobs, right? We didn't care. And so these communities, Port Charlotte, they didn't have planning and zoning until I think 70. Charlotte County didn't have it until the early 70s. So Port Charlotte had thousands of homes without ever having a home inspection built. They built a shopping center. They built hotels, not one inspection, nothing. Right? And that was Cape Coral. They could build what they wanted any way they wanted to. And that was one of the problems. No one thought it's a good idea to have 22,000 septic tanks in Lehigh Acres. And see, look at the front yard. At least that one's not leaking. It would be neon green, right? No one thought, what happens when we flood and turn into this? You know, I saw some article recently, Lehigh residents angry at flooding. I ain't gonna fix it. No one's paying for that. You know, I have an option for you, move, because it's not going to be fixed ever. Maybe a few streets will be hooked somewhere, but not in 135,000 lots when you live 7 miles out. You're going to live in that. And sprawl. This is Peace River. Punta Gorda is on the north side, on the south side, in the far area, and this is Port Charlotte in the early 70s, coming north. So sprawl. Because it was enough with 15,000 people to have 6 miles of Tamiami Trail. I remember we drive up to whatever you needed up here, the malls up here, the movie theaters up here. You just drive up and down 41. Well, what happens when you have 75,000 people? And every lot in your interior is zoned residential. You have no way to build anything else. So there are no downtowns. Why are there no downtowns? Because why would they set aside that land that wasn't needed in 58 or 68 or 78? Now it's needed. Now Cape Coral desperately needs a downtown. And it's in my book. There's certain numbers that land planners talk about. You need Tampa's downtown to pay for Tampa's schools, to pay for its parks, because they don't use schools. They don't use fire departments. They don't use any of that. Well, who pays for a new bond issue in Charlotte County? The second oldest population in the state after the villages, who are on fixed incomes. It's not good. It's not good. And I realized that this book boiled down to platting. It's a book about platting and being hamstrung and straitjacketed with lots forevermore. Single family home sites. I asked the Florida Planning Association, I did a keynote there, and I asked the room, 400 people, and I said, honestly, I need an answer. What if Jeff Bezos pointed down at Cape Coral and said, I want to build a $20 billion headquarters right there. I need 100 acres. You got all that empty land right over there, and they'd go, it's been platted for 100 three bedroom, 2 bath stucco homes. You want to build those, right? You can't do it. You can't undo the platting. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have that, but I know that's the problem. Cape Coral has held something called the Platapalooza. Land planners down there had an open meeting like this, and they said, we want your ideas. This was 15, 20 years ago. How do you undo Port Charlotte? How do you undo Northport? It's fine to have all these homes. And I was saying today, I don't disparage the people wanting to live the Florida dream. I've known many, many, many good people who came down to Port Charlotte, typically lower middle class working Americans from the Midwest, from the Northeast, many good friends that came down with a single mom with 3 kids, an abusive relationship, lived with the grandparents, right? It allowed you to move to Florida cheaply, but at a cost. that we're still paying and still figuring out. Your students are doing incredible projects to figure out how to fix Cape Coral, how to add sidewalks retroactively, how to add broadened streets retroactively, how to build anything you need retroactively. It's not a smart way to do it, right? And these salesmen are all long gone. There's no one to blame. Now the roads. This is another thing. The roads to nowhere. This is the origin of this whole book. My roads to nowhere at 17. That's Lehigh Acres today. And so I'm almost done. So you would have someone would build a house in the outer rim of Port Charlotte because there were no rules. When I was growing up, my mom and dad had good friends, and they built a great, mid-century modern house with a pool. We didn't have a pool. It was like, a holiday going there. Going to Libby and David's. And we go out there, and it was a nice house with a pool cage, and it was 3 miles of woods that way, 4 miles of woods that way. And I just wonder, why? You want any neighbors? It's like you're on the frontier, but you have one lot. I get it if you want to live in the country. You want 5 acres. They didn't want 5 acres. They had a little yard in the woods, like a house right there. And so what happens when you have to pick up trash? You have to respond to a fire call or a domestic call. Well, we'll be there in 25 minutes, right? I know in Golden Gate Estates, there's still parts of Golden Gate Estates near Naples. When they have a giant forest fire, these guys are running out there like the Keystone Cops with tinders, big things full of water to go fight the fire with water, like it's 1897. There are no fire hydrants. There are parts of Cape Coral, I bet, today. Even Cape Coral, which is building, is 250,000 people. There are parts there that you have to bring tinders to get to a fire. Big tub of water, right? I mean, there's so many problems with that, so many expenditures, and the roads themselves. Lee County, Charlotte County, Collier County, Hernando, they're paying people right now to mow the roads. These are roads and streets that aren't used, that were built 30 and 40 years ago that have trees growing up through them. But they're public roads. And then you get one joker who builds his dream house because he can, and you better fix that road. So they're going to pave it. Right? You get one guy 2 miles out in Northport, and he's got a newly paved road at what cost? Not smart, And so this is a Florida living problem. And the last thing, people do nefarious things on these roads. Nefarious things. In my book, I tell a story. Sarasota County has always hated Northport. Northport hates Sarasota. Sarasota, the city, hates Northport. Sarasota was old and moneyed. Northport was out at the end of the county. And Northport wanted to build, the General Development Corporation, the Mackles, wanted to build thousands of homes. And Sarasota said, no, we're not going to let you, because they had the right to plan and zone. We're not going to let you build those septic tanks on low land. No. And so the Mackles went to the state, pulled strings, threw their money around, and they incorporated 22 people into the city of Northport. 22 employees or something like that, incorporated a city, and their first and only act of government for like 10 years was to incorporate 16,000 acres and set building codes to get away from building codes, right? And so Sarasota hated Northport. And so Northport was these roads to nowhere. And I remember, it's in my book, in the 90s, somebody wrote in Sarasota Magazine, wrote an editorial and said, Northport is the perfect place to dump a body, right? And people got mad. They're sending letters in. And he apologized. And I wrote, well, clearly these people were ignoring the fact that someone was actually dumping bodies there at that time. And I actually cited, there's someone dumping bodies. It was a killer out there. People throw trash down these streets. People set fires on these streets. High school students, I was there, party on these streets to this day. There's burned out. Oh, yeah. 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 Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. And what? Oh, yeah. Absolutely. There's no cell phones, no lights, no nothing. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So one thing, it was always an urban legend to me that drug flights were coming into these streets. I heard those stories all the time. Well, I didn't believe them as a kid, sort of believed them until I got into this book. These empty roads, that's Northport today. Okay. All right. Anything I'd repeat now? Okay. So these are the roads I'm talking about. We call them grassfault. Okay. This is rotunda. A pot-laden plan plows into a field, and I was shocked. This is from the 70s. I can't see it from here, but the 70s. And he clipped a power line, and I was shocked. Not that they were flying drugs in, that he clipped a power line, that there was a power line, that there were enough people to have power. He clips a power line and crashes. And this is truly, I've looked through 1 million articles. I've interviewed 1 million people as a writer and historian. This is the best article I've ever found. Deputies and customs agents continue to circle on foot in vehicles looking for a man who was described as looking like Lyndon Johnson. Okay, so this is the 70s. So literally it's Lyndon Johnson that we know, not young Lyndon with his baggy breeches, his Sansa belts running down the street, right? Okay. Look at this one, Golden Gate Estates, 80s, cocaine cowboys years. What's 175 million in the 80s today? I've done the math, 70 zillion, okay? That's a lot of money. That's Pablo Escobar money. They also found Tantra training facilities in Golden Gate, militia facilities. I mean, this was the Wild West. I wrote in my book, they were interviewing Collier deputies. They called Golden Gate Estates the body dump. That's where you went to get rid of a body because alligators would eat it, and you couldn't get back in there. Oh, this is another one. Cape Coral, a paradise for dope smugglers. I can't even see it. I guess I can't go with the microphone. We figure as much as 90% of the marijuana smuggled into the United States came in from Colombia, South America. And we figured that as much as 90%, 80% of that 90% is fleeing to Southwest Florida. Can't see the screen, but I'm maybe got it wrong, but you get the point. They were flying the bales into these streets. Cops couldn't get there, even if you could see them. How do you figure out the maze? It's like a maze, like a kid's maze. How do you get there? They would dump the bales off to a truck with no lights. It would drive some way out or go to a boat, and the plane would fly away. This was cocaine cowboys history of Florida. These streets, these roads to nowhere. Okay, so let me finish this. How did this end? How did this era end of installment land sales? It's very clear. 1955, I would say, to 1975, 20 years. First of all, they built too many lots. Port Charlotte had a backlog that they're still working through. They're all working through these lots, even today. Too many lots. Prices depressed. Companies are trying to sell their lots. There's a secondary market, right? We say it's $1,000 and they're like, give me 400, I'm out of here. So they're being defeated by their own buyers. But then the Rosens, they go into raw acreage sales, which is different than home site sales. Leonard Rosen realized that he had promised all these lots, taking your $10, $20 down, whatever. But in 8 or 9 years, his brother did the books. We owe $100 million in the 60s. We've spent our money on boats. The finest art collection in Florida for many years was the Gulf American Art Collection in the Gulf American headquarters in Miami, where you could see if you would go look at lots in Cape Coral, right? They almost bought the Miami Dolphins when the Dolphins first came in. I mean, they spent their money, they lived well. Now they owe this. They always know they're on the hook. They've made money, but they still owe this money. And so Leonard Rosen goes, let's sell raw acreage. Let's promise these guys nothing. Let's use the same salesman and sell the Florida dream and let them say everything they want off the books. But legally, in the fine print, it says, we're not building anything here, man. A lawyer wrote that fine print. It says, we're not building roads. We're not building power hookups. We're not building home sites. This is investment acreage. But that's not what you were told. That's not what you thought these were going to be. And so this raw acreage business gets the Rosens in big trouble. Governor Claude Kirk went after him with, threatened him with thousands of felonies, and they finally sold out. Right. But this raw acreage business was what created Golden Gate Estates, which is down near Naples, south of I-75, south of Alligator Alley, 55,000 acres of nothing that people thought they could build on. So while Port Charlotte might have sold you, a basic community, they sold you a community. Cape Coral sold you a community. Whether or not it was the perfect community, that's up to you. But Golden Gate Estates was a scam, a real scam. And so the federal government in the 80s went back and between buying up land, eminent domaining, the Conservancy was a super well-heeled, Naples money environmental group that, you donate millions and you buy land and you just take it away. You give it back to the environment. And so they all got together. The Bush administration in Florida and the Clinton administration worked together at various times to undo Golden Gate Estates. And today it's now a state park where I have a friend who's an engineer is going in there and they're taking out dams and dikes and weirs and roads and they're just letting the water flow. But unfortunately, they did enough damage where they screwed with the water table, they screwed with the trees, the native vegetation died, and now it's pepper trees, Maliuca trees. It's a mess. It's an invasive species mess that was a land scam. Now, lastly, there's Picayune Sand. You can still see that. That's Google Earth. You can see the streets. You can still see the streets, the boulevards that were fake. They were made you to think in the dry season that you could live here when they were never going to let you live here, never give you services, and even septic. It was impossible. It was like building the pyramids, to do this. It was a lie. They did that in Polk County, River Ranch. For those of you know River Ranch, that was another one. Holy smokes, River Ranch was one. And now there are people in Polk County and River Ranch, there are 30 or 40,000 lot owners that no one knows. They have free run to the property. No one even knows what it is. Look it up. It's remarkable. It's a problem Florida will never deal with. Who owns this? What is it? Private, public? What is it? People are homesteading out in the woods. And then finally, what happens to the whole business? The 1970s come and we have double-digit inflation, world oil crises. So this model, $10 down, $10 a month, you're not making money anymore. You screwed up. You owe more on the back end. It costs more to even do the basic ditch work, the land clearing. And so the entire industry literally disappears. Only one company really hangs on to the model, General Development Corporation, and they began building homes and lying about the value of the homes. They got in trouble very famously on national TV. They would pay the same guys to appraise homes, and they would only appraise General Development homes. They would ignore the other ones. So it'd be $20,000 higher. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac stopped taking their loans. You're a criminal organization when right. And they got in trouble very publicly in the 80s where, like on a show like The Price is Right or something, a couple won a home. They won a General Development home in Florida, and the IRS said, all right, it's $80,000. You owe us whatever. And they got it appraised, and it appraised for 60. So they were lying, and it came out on national news, and then they went under in a class action suit, massive, in the late 80s, early 90s. But all the other companies were done and out of the game. And finally, one note on the Mackles, where they lost out was in Marco Island. They were going to clear Marco Island, just devastate it, into 5,000 single-family home sites on an island, dredge and fill in 5 different sections. Every 3 years, they would sell Section A, Section B. They sold it all in the first 4 years, first 5 years. And the Army Corps of Engineers said, do what you want for the first 3, do what you want for the next 3 years, and then, wait a minute, environmental movement starts, the 70s starts. Even Nixon's administration was pro-environment, crazy to believe. And they shut it down. And so the Mackles lost, and in my book I mentioned, I guess 50 million in a day because they had to give all that money back. And so they sold the Marco Island Hotel, the Key Biscayne Hotel. They sold their, that was the end of the dynasty, and I interviewed Frank Mackle III, nicest guy. And poor guy was the one who took the reins right when the world just crashed on him and there was nothing he could do, and so there's still a Mackle company, I believe, but it's a shell of what it was. So, all right. Well, any questions? I really appreciate you gues being here. Sorry if I'm such a downer, but this is Florida's development history. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I was told to repeat questions. So. Anyone? Hi. Yeah, right. Yeah. So what about the Mackle kidnapping? Yeah, that was where the Mackles became nationally known. They were known in business world. In '68, the middle brother, Robert Mackle, his daughter was an Emory University student, a very pretty girl, an econ major, smart, dutiful girl, nice girl, who an escaped convict working. He worked at MIT in the labs. He would set up their lab experiments. Then he came to Miami because they did background checks, was running their like C lab, C program at Miami, decided he wanted to go with his girlfriend and run around the world. And he needed $500,000 to do it. He wanted to sail the world. So he went to the Miami library and looked up wealthy people of Miami saying he was doing a doctoral dissertation. And he found the Mackles and he found her and he kidnapped her at Emory and buried her in a box for 83 hours in Georgia while he came to Florida to get the money. And that was how the Mackles made national news. There were 2 movies about it. Barbara Mackles never spoke about it again. She wrote a book in '71 that's phenomenal, and never spoke about it again. I found her on Facebook one time, but no one has ever gotten her to talk about it. It's fascinating. 500,000, and the FBI had to count it out by hand. Giant suitcase. They caught the guy, and he got out on parole and got arrested again. And he's out now. He lives somewhere in the South. But a fascinating story. Look it up, the Mackle kidnapping. It's brilliant, brilliant, horrible tale. Hey.
One that's flying, but plane, which can move it flat. That 2/3 of the air, you can look down, and there is a huge planet, huge, you're all there, things there, but selfish of people.
Yeah, those subdivisions.
Well,
Yes.
check it, went to the platform, for information, and was continuing across stream and the plot and multiple blocks. Well, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for anyone listening on Zoom, what he's talking about is submerged lands. And before planning restrictions, and in the old days when you greased Tallahassee in various ways, you would pay the internal improvement fund. You would own a lot or 2 lots on a body of water. And as long as you weren't disturbing commerce and getting the Army Corps of Engineers involved, you could build out. You could literally build an island and put a house on it, or 10 houses, or a condo. Go online, for those of you in your program. Go online and look at Boca Ciega Bay, and look at how many islands are perfect squares, perfect rectangles. And you're like, that's not natural. That wasn't an island with a seawall. You look at Boca Ciega Bay, and it's insane what was done there in the '50s. They built entire islands of housing developments, whole dredged and filled. And the internal improvement fund, a lot of that money would then be used as a slush fund in Tallahassee for projects. The Supreme Court of Florida, I wrote in my book, I read that they use that submerged lands fund. You'd pay the state a little pennies for this, for the builder, the land, but it's land. It belongs to us. belongs to citizens. The state would give it away for nothing, and the Supreme Court of Florida built a library for itself. Florida Atlantic wanted better our architecture renderings for Florida Atlantic in the early days. So they wanted a big name architect. So they sold Florida's submerged lands to pay for an architect. It was rodeo arenas and, just projects, pet projects, pork that wasn't paid for by the state. It was our own lands. And that finally ended. You can't do that anymore. But you're right. That was a big fight in Sarasota. I didn't read up about it, but Arvida is another giant, Arthur Vining Davis, big developer. Yep. And they built huge developments, and people fought like dogs over that politically. And that was the environmental movement put an end to that. And the Mackle story, someone who studies environment needs to write Markle Island's history, because that's when the environmental movement ended this crap. We're not letting you do that anymore. So much has changed. Yes. I don't talk about the 80s. I talk about the 80s with general development declining. He was talking about different development acts and growth, coming in, the one in 72 and then later in the 80s. I know another one apart from the 80s, another big time was Hurricane Andrew. That was building codes. And that was another thing that put the kibosh on these developments, because you now had to spend more money. You couldn't build a chintzy house. In my book, I mentioned in Rotunda, they had houses that didn't even attach the ceiling, the roof beams to the cinder blocks. You know what I mean? Like, you could build what you wanted in some of these places. And these acts were fundamental in saving Floridians. Certainly the state didn't really defend buyers. In my book, the state would look at the ads to make sure they weren't promising anything extra, but they were really just putting a Band-Aid on it to keep the money flowing. Numerous governors became representatives of land development companies. These were the donors. This was the money. This was where the action was in the 60s, 70s, and it started to stop in the 80s. But this glory days of just Wild West. The thought was, if you build it, they will come. No? Yeah.
That when Sarasota County got the right to do planning and zoning, that their first chairperson for planning was 20 years. And the senator from Sarasota, who got the South County Road Board, well, I don't know what to do with her, and I remember her name, Laura Kevin. It's now like,
Oh, I Yeah. They were these developer families were our Kennedys in these small towns. I mean, I can tell you that they weren't just wealthy like doctors in a middle class area. They were mega millionaires in places where everyone around me in Port Charlotte. I don't remember great poverty in Charlotte County, and I don't remember great wealth because of Port Charlotte. Everybody was this middle income retiree, and all the people who served them. You know what I mean? So maybe that's a good thing in some ways, that some of these developments were fairly egalitarian in the beginning, in the first 20, 30 years. Because it's an 80 by 125 at home site. Not a lot of super wealthy people are satisfied with that. And so one question I had for you guys who are doing Cape Coral, where does the rubber meet the road with sea level rise, with global warming? When do those waterfront lots that people are willing to pay $1.5 million, $2 million for a good bayfront lot, when is that lot untenable anymore? When is that lot not worth, when you can't insure it and someone who's wealthy doesn't want a waterlogged quarter acre on the Caloosahatchee because you can't give them 5 acres? You know, no one, what are you going to build a tower? And you can't because it's a single family limited. You know what I mean? You're not allowed to build a 6-story tower on it. It's a little dinky lot. When is the rubber going to meet the road in places like Punta Gorda Isles and Venice and Fort Lauderdale? You know, we're seeing that. And I mentioned, you know, I have ideas, but you know, I think you'd have to really, and as I told someone today, I think you'd have to be in, you know, in actuarial sciences. The insurance companies know when the end is coming, when they won't pay, when it won't happen anymore. You know, it's going to be strategic retreat. They're calling it in a lot of Florida. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Stands right now, Florida building codes work when it comes to wind. We figured out pretty well how to engineer our way out of wind. But the devastation from tidal surge is wild unknown. And I've also served a career in 2006, 2007. We had infrastructure in Vermont, 2006, 2007. And over each has
Sure. So when are we going to see? And I don't know when that's going to be. You know, right now they're gangbusters. People, you know, a good friend of mine is big in a construction firm, and he's like, we're going gangbusters everywhere, everywhere. And I just when is the rubber going to meet the road? I don't know. I'm not a prognosticator. I'm not a futurist. I'm not even a doomsayer. We'll live on in Florida in different ways, but when is the middle class Florida dream untenable anymore? You know, when Port Charlotte's uninsurable 3-4 miles from the Peace River, when it's upland, but when is that uninsurable or not worth rebuilding? You know, when in 2050, 2060? When does, well, one more question, pardon me, and Marco Island, there's thousands of $1 million homes on small lots, thousands. Everyone has a canal. Where's that going to be? And I read one report in 2060, they expect daily inundation of tides. 2060, you guys aren't that old. You guys aren't old. You're going to be working in 2060. What do you do? You know, and I was laughing. He was saying some of the students were like, we got to do Cape Coral. Let's do some super sexy building. You know, those are the jobs. That's figuring out how to live in Florida in the future. That's where the action will be. What do we do? Look at Punta Gorda Isles. Look at Punta Gorda Isles on your phone. Just look at the Google map, zoom in and just look at it and go, what sea level rise? Where is that going? And those are the nicest homes in my town that undergird the entire tax structure. It's gone. What happens to a town that's been there for 150 years, 140 years? There'd be nothing. You know what I mean? It's a little town dredged and filled, built not far from the water. There'll be nothing left of it. I don't know. I don't know where we're going to go in these and how these lots fit into global warming. And it's a great question. You know, how to fix it. Okay. I don't think so. I've never seen a connection. Oh, are they connected with the Rosens who were connected with the Lennar Corp? Yeah. Um, I do not think so. The one brother died in the 60s, and Leonard Rosen sold out and moved to Vegas very early on. So he has not played a role. I know that recently his daughter came back to Cape Coral and they gave her the key to the city. I'm sure she's a very nice woman and didn't live there and was probably just as floored as I would be if they gave me the key to the city. But they gave her the key to the city. It was a celebration of the Rosens and yeah, right. I'm not sure. But well, thank you guys. Thank you, all of you. Thank you. And
If you like what we're doing at the Matheson, I hope you join the museum. Sometimes we have people there to sign you up, but you can go to mathesonmuseum.org and sign up and come back. You know, this has been a very interesting and disturbing talk. We thought we had problems in Gainesville. Thank you very much. And I want to recognize our director, Caitlin Huff Mahoney, who's been at the machine, you know, turning the slide. And thank all of you for attending. Jeff.
Just a couple of work now. This is a couple of work. It's your minor.
How do we get your